Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Forward Worthington Government Affairs hosted discussion. It's important to, I think, raise your hand and serve and step up, and these three today have done that. They've also went further to show up today and hear comments from us and tell us what they're thinking. So we appreciate that and welcome you all for being here today. Thank you. I also want to thank everybody for showing up. I think just as important is to show up and listen and to provide feedback and be part of this discussion and potentially even fill these types of roles over time. So thank you all for being here. We'll start off. We're really fortunate to have Representative Joe Schomacher, Senator Bill Weber, and Representative Marge Fogelman. We'll start off with some opening comments. Joe, you ready to start off first?
Well, sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here today and for having this event. It's good to have a session wrap up that's a few days away from the end of session, and that happens every time. So we're on a good start with that. I'm in my 8th term in the legislature now and serving this year as the co-chair for the Human Services Committee. I think the biggest thing out of this last session, well, there was a number of things that came out of this last session, but the biggest thing that will continue to be worked on is the deficit that we're projecting for the next legislative session, and what that really means for the state overall. Of course, we went from an $18 billion budget surplus just a couple of years ago to a $6 billion budget deficit 2 years from now, but the sooner we can act on some of those things, the better off we are. And so we saw several drivers in those, in the spending that went on there, and so we attempted to at least address some of that this year, hoping that a little bit goes a long ways with some of the adjustments that were made in those budgets, and we'll continue on with that. And beyond that, this next year we'll be looking at policy overall. I think it'll be, I know it'll be a short session, but I think it'll be shorter than what we even anticipate at this point. I think the closer we get to it, the shorter it's going to end up being. So again, just thankful to be here and happy to have the conversation this morning.
Thank you. Senator Bill?
Thank you. Well, again, thank you for inviting me to be here today. And certainly this past session was another one for the record books in light of the fact that there was a tie in the House of Representatives, and there was only a one-seat majority for the other side in the Senate. It certainly kept much of the crazy stuff from coming forward as it had in the previous 2 years. But certainly I would say that it's disappointing from the standpoint that we didn't get to make as many corrections, if you would call them that, as I would have hoped from the previous 2 years. But with the projected deficit, a lot remains to be seen. Right now, on a nationwide basis, we're seeing a reduction of inflation. We're seeing a lower energy costs, and all those type of things will actually make a difference in our state economy here as well. And so it'll be interesting to get to November of this year and see what that forecast is as far as the financial condition of the state is concerned. And I think the current projections, there's the first time, quite frankly, that inflation was considered in developing those projections, and that added somewhere in the neighborhood of $3-4 billion, I think, to the overall total projection as well, or at least half of the projected deficit. And so this has been my 13th year, was my 13th session, and quite frankly, they all have ended differently. And then within the events that the week that followed the end of special session, it does become very, very sobering at that point. And certainly, I had a text message exchange with Senator Hoffman, who was the senator that was shot on the Saturday after special session this past week, and he's doing well. I think there's probably going to be some changes up in the Capitol, changes that maybe some of us aren't real excited about, but probably, out of necessity will happen. And so that remains to be seen as to what those changes are. And certainly that was, I got a text message from my local sheriff on that Saturday morning, and at that point, I wasn't even aware of what had happened. And so I finally called him and I said, Evan, what's going on? And so he then filled me in on those details. But anyway, things continue to change. Actually, I'm leaving Worthington as soon as we're done here for Buffalo, Minnesota to attend the funeral of Senator Bruce Anderson, who passed away last week, which was a surprise. And so life is uncertain, whether you're just in your everyday citizenship or whether you're an elected official. And so anyway, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for the support you have always given me and us. And I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And now Representative Marge Fogelman.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. They said a lot. I'll say a few things. I'm starting my second session. The year was interesting with the tie and everything going on with that. I'm serving on the transportation committees, the education committee, and I am also proud to be the co-chair, vice chair of the capital investment committee. We did a lot of things in helping protect our non-public aid, non-pupil public aid in education, which I think was really important, and stopping some things of background checks and stuff on parents that wanted to teach their own children at home. I don't think that would have been necessary. There's a lot of stuff that was going on in fraud. I don't know if any of you have been watching that at all, but I think the last thing I saw in American Experiment was over $660 million of fraud in our state that is uncovering. That's your taxpayer dollars. And I think it's important that we continue to shed light on that and get fixes for that. Unfortunately, we didn't stop some of the stuff with the earned safe and sick time and the paid family medical leave that's going to be starting in January. I know I have received a lot of communication from small businesses on that and their concerns, as well as the schools, on how that is going to hurt them and from a budgetary standpoint. So there's lots of things going on. I'm sure you all have lots of questions and look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
Very good. Thank you. I also want to thank Scooters, provided the coffee and support for this morning, keep us all moving. We're taking questions from the audience. Either you can, I think there's pad and pen, you can submit those, or raise your hand, we'll call on you, and you can express that in a little more detail. We appreciate that opportunity to have interaction. Does anybody want to start us off? Just as you put your question together, I can maybe lead the discussion a little bit. Senator Weber, you mentioned the close split in both the House and the Senate. Can you all speak to that, how it perhaps affects what you do and currently and going forward, and does that perhaps improve some things and detract from other things? And you can start off since it was your comment.
Well, certainly. We started out the session this past year with the Senate tied as well. Due to the death of Senator Dziedzic in December, we was 33-33 in the Senate. And so we then started out with a co-chair situation, and which then ended in the latter part of January with the special election that filled Senator Dziedzic's spot. And I think a lot of things, there were a number of bills that were proposed on the Senate side that didn't go anywhere because the chairs didn't advance them because they knew that they would fail in the House with the tie situation over there. You know, there are individuals on the other side of the aisle that wanted to raise the individual income tax rate to 12% and give us the highest tax rate in the country, as well as corporate tax rates. You know, I had a conversation one day with an individual from the Department of Revenue, and I said, do you have any information? I said, on a statewide basis, I know that at the federal level, the federal income tax revenue goes up every time they cut income tax rates. And he thought for a moment, he said, well, no, I don't think any information like that exists in Minnesota. I said, we know why that is, don't you? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, there's never been an income tax cut in Minnesota of any significance. That's why you don't have any information regarding it. But it is one of those things that it'll be interesting to see. Iowa now went to a flat tax. They'll see how things go there. But to get back to Mr. Wohl's comments, I think it certainly tempered the bills that wound up advancing through the legislature. And as I said, we didn't manage to correct everything we wanted to correct. But certainly there was a little greater sense of realism to what came through.
Sure. Representative Fogelman, you have any comments?
Well, the one thing I find was interesting about the tie, we started out with a one-seat majority, and even though we didn't have enough to pass anything, the Republicans worked on things like keeping the boys out of girls' sports. That was important to a lot of people. There's a lot of trains. There was a train that they wanted to do from Minneapolis to Wyoming because they thought that was going to be a great thing. So things like that got stopped. But a lot of things that we wanted to do, like Senator Weber mentioned, is we couldn't push a lot of things forward that I know that a lot of people contacted me about. Like the paid family medical leave was probably the biggest thing that we wanted to pull back and put a pause on for at least a year to try to make some sense out of it and not punish every employer, because we tried when it initially passed to not have super small businesses, employees with 10 or 15 or 20. They didn't want anything of that. Nobody could be exempted from that. So we still tried to push some of that forward. So it was disappointing that we couldn't get any kind of movement on that. Because like I said, I've heard from so many small businesses and schools about this, and it's very frustrating. So, but we still have to remember that we all have to work together. It doesn't always go how we want to. They also wanted to have voting for 16-year-olds in our elections. That didn't happen, so that's a good thing that we can kind of balance each other out on those kind of things. So it's going to continue to be an interesting year. Representative Schulmacher thinks that it's going to be short, so I will look forward to that, but we'll see what happens. But like I said, it's good, and then it's good to hear from our constituents, so I encourage you all to keep always contacting us when you have concerns so that we can bring that to the full body and hopefully move some positive things forward for the entire state, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be taking care of all the Minnesotans, whether you're Democrat or Republican. We want the best for Minnesota, so we have a growing economy, businesses coming in, not leaving our state, which is what's happening right now.
Representative Schulmacher, the pluses and minuses of a bipartisan split?
Yeah, I was quite optimistic ahead of session that we might get to run a session that was almost post-partisan in the realm, because there wasn't enough votes to pass anything either way without having something that everyone could at least somewhat agree to, or at least more in the balance of things. And so maybe not all the Republicans would agree and maybe not all the Democrats would agree, but a majority from each side could agree to that. And I thought we'd be passing a lot more with maybe 68 to 75 votes on things. But in a lot of cases, we were passing things in the 90s and 100 for a lot of what we had there. I was thinking ahead of time too of just how the last time that we had a session that was in a tie was in the 70s, I believe, and just comparing some of those pieces and how that worked out and how that compared and contrasted to what things were like here. And I was actually giving a Rotary program just before the beginning of session in Laverne over Zoom and talking about all the different makeup and how optimistic I was for things, and gave this really great, almost a standing ovation for it was well received anyway, and gave that my impression of things based on the history of it all, and then got done with that call, went out into the hallway at the office building there, and was informed that everything had kind of blown up in that time, and that everything I had just talked about there and how I had seen things going wasn't going to happen because we had the election irregularities in the Shakopee seat that were being contested, and that was causing trouble with whether members were going to agree to be seated or not, and all of that kind of just started to unravel things. And the one positive thing I would say out of all this is that none of that just continued the downward spiral. It didn't. At some point, especially the leadership were able to step back and then restart some of those talks and negotiations throughout, because the ultimate objective was to get a budget deal done at the end of the day, and something that people could agree to. My experience since the end of session is that no one's really happy with the budgets that we passed, including myself with what was passed, but that's kind of what you expect with compromise. And this was the first year in at least 3 years that anyone had to do any kind of compromising. And so having that, for better or worse, was, I think, the expected result at the end of the day. I'd served as the co-chair for the Human Services Committee during that time. We had a $1.3 billion budget, a negative budget target to deal with over that for our 4-year budget outlook, and how that really worked. And that became a very difficult proposition. We were one of well, it just takes a long time when you're spending tens of billions of dollars and you need to settle out that budget. It takes a long time anyway. We remained working in a real bipartisan fashion, I would say, up until about the midpoint, and then we went off the rails for a little bit, but got back on because, again, at the end of the day, we were talking about humans and their lives, and really the impacts that had with that, and what good does dragging this out really get us at the end of the day. And so there were a few times that it was very frustrating to be in the process as it was. A few times that I would have expected more bipartisanship, especially out of the Senate. That's what we always heard, is that, well, we only have a one vote majority. That's what the Democrats would always tell us, is we only have a one vote majority. We've got to pass stuff that the Democrats can vote for. And I'm thinking there's 33 others that could also be voting for this too if you just worked a little bit with them. And so the partisanship, it wasn't a post-partisan session for sure with that. But we can always go back next year and do better.
Very good. Thank you. Again, please indicate if you're interested in bringing a question up. Yeah, please.
Hi, Carrie Bendix with the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council. I was wondering, kind of, as you go into the next session, what will be some of your priorities or things you would want to work on?
So just to briefly repeat that, the priorities going into the next session. Senator Fogelman, or Representative Fogelman, please.
Well, I'm going to harp on it. I'm going to keep harping on it. That paid family medical leave, that is just going to be a huge setback to our state, the way it's set up right now. So if it's repealing it, if it's pushing it out another year, well, it's going to start in 2026. So our businesses are going to be taking effect. So that's something that's huge. Just as a small business owner, my husband and myself and our son, I mean, we have small business, but it still affects us and it affects how we do our business. And I hear it all the time. I'm telling you, that's the number one thing I hear when I'm out and about, and my emails and everything else. So that's something that I'm going to continue to be passionate about. The earn safe and sick time too. We are telling our private business owners how they should run their businesses, and that's not the job of the government. So that's something I will continue to work on. Of course, education is a big thing. We have so many mandates that took place in the last session that are hurting our schools. I've heard that time and time again. The Meals for All is expensive, and we can't sustain it. The time off, the unemployment for our bus drivers and our paras and stuff during the off season for school, that's another very expensive mandate that's going to start falling on the taxpayers. We funded it this year. Again, we took some money from here and put it into that fund, and we're not going to be able to keep doing that. So I hope that those are some of the things that we can start helping our schools and helping our small businesses to have a better Minnesota.
Thank you. Representative Schomacher, the priorities going into the next session.
Yeah, I think we'll continue to be working on the budget piece of it, even though we have a settled budget. If there is a supplementary budget, I think it'll be in just certain areas where it's absolutely needed. Of course, the governor's office is going to make requests in every area, and people are going to have bills in to provide extra funding. But I don't know that we necessarily need to be addressing it in every area of the budget in a supplemental way. I think that the forecast, as Senator Weber had pointed out, the forecast in November is going to tell us a whole lot more. We're basing the $6 billion deficit off of the February forecast, which had a lot of unknowns as far as the tariff projections, and the uncertainty is what they were basing a lot of their negative forecasting on. We've had a few months with some of that behind us and seem to get more clarity on that issue more and more. And so I think I'm optimistic that we'll have a bit of a better picture moving forward, but that doesn't mean we should start spending more too. And anytime you open the budget up, what seems to happen is some groups then get cut so that we can do spending in other areas, and it's an election year, and it's a split government, and everybody's up this next time around. And so I think we'd all be better off if we really stuck to the essentials for what needed to absolutely be done with the budget moving forward, so that the next legislative session isn't set up with the either-or options. My first legislative session, we were facing a $6 billion budget deficit that had to be dealt with in that moment, and that was quite a difficult task. But we see a lot better trends moving forward. Just the end of this last session, I think in July, we got the numbers for how the last budget cycle actually ended up, and we had an extra $800 million that we weren't projected to have in the first place. And so isn't that nice? If my own bank account, I could wake up and have an extra $800 million that I wasn't expecting, I wouldn't be doing this anymore probably. But that's a positive area. But one area we do need to continue our focus on is that fraud piece that Representative Fogelman talked about a little bit there too. We just heard from the U.S. Attorney last week that he anticipates prosecuting over $1 billion of fraud in the state of Minnesota, and what that means. And we hear from the Department of Human Services in their fraud efforts. They tell us for every dollar we put into fraud prosecution or fraud investigation that we can get $8 collected back. And it's frustrating to me, and it has been my entire life. Why should we be spending more taxpayer dollars to investigate and root out fraud just to collect back part of what was taxpayer dollars to begin with? So one positive thing we had during this last legislative session was that those who are licensed under the Department of Human Services for these pieces are paying considerably more for their licenses that they have now than what they had before, and that comes with additional training and resources in order to help them to not to be able to operate in a way that is in compliance with the state. And so I think that some of the sticking points, especially with fraud, is that sometimes they're just good people who documented something wrong. I mean, we've seen it where providers have had their funding cut off because they had reported that a service was provided at 7 a.m. and it was actually 7 p.m. when it was done, and then all of a sudden they get cut off from there. That's not the real fraud that we have out there. The stuff that they're talking about that's grabbing the headlines, that's the real fraud out there. And so if we can provide resources to providers to help them avoid those paperwork irregularities that are not actually fraudulent, just human error, and allow a greater focus then on the inspectors. That's all coming from the industry itself and the providers themselves to self-police in that. And it's not taxpayer dollars directly then going to have to root this out. And I think that was a good idea overall. And I think that as we continue on this next legislative session, we really do need to get a better handle on fraud. We did a lot of it this year because we knew it was going to be an issue. And the more we hear, the worse it seems to get. And so we're going to continue with that and see what we can do to provide more oversight in those areas. Of course, I was reminded this last year while we had a legislative hearing with the Office of the Legislative Auditor about fraud and what could be done. This was right after, I think either the housing stuff came out or one of the other breaches came out. We had the legislative auditor in to ask about what could be done in these areas and was reminded that there is a difference between the legislative branch and the executive branch, and we have to give authority, but we don't do the actual investigating on the legislative side of things. And so to just be cognizant of that throughout the whole process too is something we'll have to take in mind with that. But that's going to be the biggest focus for me, is making sure that our taxpayer dollars are protected as best we can.
Thank you. Senator Weber, priorities?
Well, I think as we go forward, and as Joe mentioned, the budget is in place. Whether we need to make some adjustments to it in anticipation of a future deficit remains to be seen. But we all recognize that there were cuts proposed this year that were originally very damaging to our counties. The governor really didn't care if he had to balance his budget on the backs of local units of government. The one thing that I would like to comment on is that of all the cuts that had to be made, the one area that you won't see any cuts is in the state. No state department, no state staffing got cut. They continue on when you have an upcoming deficit as if nothing is going on. And they expect our cities and our counties and our townships and our school districts to make adjustments to account for that. But somehow they seem to be immune from that. And that is a frustrating element for me. And quite frankly, in light of the Thai situation, in light of those in charge right now, there was not going to be a change into that element. And that's where we really need to focus some effort. The previous 2 years, that budget authorized between 3,000 and 4,000 new state employees. The estimate is that there's 400 employees needed to fully fund the paid family leave department. So there's plenty of room to make substantial cuts within state government itself that don't need to affect local governments or our citizens. Somehow, there are not enough people up there that are willing to grab that bull by the horns and deal with it. And I would hope that as we move forward, that we can do that. Certainly, our E12 system, with the mandates that have been placed on it, I have 20-some independent school districts in my Senate district. Some with a graduating class of 12 and some with close to 300. I saw numbers that when I asked the question, what are your what are your budgets looking like? You know, there was a shortfall of $100 and some thousand to almost $2 million. What does that mean? That means that our schools wind up either having to cut staffing and programs or raise their taxes. Neither one of those are desirable, but that is what the legislature gave them to deal with. And I remember 3 years ago when they passed the budget, that, oh, there's a historic increase in the amount of state assistance to our school districts. It was also an historic increase in the number of mandates that got placed on them that ate up that increase plus a whole bunch more. So I would hope that at some point in time, we can convince those in charge to actually be honest about our funding process and what we're requiring of our schools and of our local units of government. Quite frankly, these mandates wind up going on everybody. The mandates that are on our small businesses are mandates on our local units of government. They have to live with everything just the way the rest of us do. And so I would hope that as we go forward, and you know, quite frankly, we don't know what the year is going to be like. We would assume at this point the House will remain tied. There's one special election coming up. The Senate has two special elections coming up, one due to the death of Senator Anderson, and the other one due to the resignation of the cat burglar from Woodbury. And you know, it took a jury 3 hours to figure out what her caucus couldn't figure out in 15 months, but that's another story. We will, you know, is it possible that we might have a one-seat majority? That's possible. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but there's two special elections coming up in the Senate. And so as we go forward from here, even if that were to happen, quite frankly, even if both bodies were to switch control, you know, you can pass all the bills you want, but unless the governor signs them, they don't take effect. And so it's going to be a challenging year coming up as we deal with these issues. But hopefully that, you know, as if our budget situation improves somewhat, or if it doesn't improve, hopefully realism will finally set in and the state will make cuts where they actually need to be made.
Thank you. Please.
Sarah Nelson, I am a small business owner, and I wouldn't mind I pay my fair share of taxes. I wouldn't mind my taxes going towards free meals for all. I would not, and all the safety nets that we need. So what are you guys gonna be doing, holding there's two parts of the question. What are you guys gonna be doing to hold the big corporations and the top earners of our state to their fair share of taxes? And what are you guys gonna be doing with the big beautiful bill? And we have how many of the small hospitals that might be going under because of less funding? What are you guys gonna be doing about that?
So for Cable 3 benefit, I'll try to summarize, correct me if I'm wrong here, as a business owner, the willingness to pay her fair share and wondering about some potential shortfalls within the school-specific program, the Feeding the Kids, and then keeping some balance. And Representative Schulmacher, if you can start us off.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I think on the question of what the corporations are paying, I think you just have to look at what the forecast is showing is that corporate income tax is actually going down in the state. Individual income tax is going up, but what we're collecting is, as far as sales tax and as far as corporate income tax, has been going down dramatically over the past several years. And so that doesn't answer the question, but it does. It is part of what has to be considered when we would think about what fair share might be within that and who big corporations are within the scope of this. I think there's the question is more about what really fits into those categories than anything else. As far as the big, beautiful bill goes, we're still trying to get the real numbers on that. We've had briefings from the governor's office and what those will have. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, his numbers were very similar to what was suggested they would be in January, and so I'll be interested to see what actually comes of that. We've been reaching out and talking to some of the other congressional leaders to get more details about what's coming out from those. But in particular, when I talked to the Hospital Association last week on this, they're very interested in the extra grants that are coming forward from the federal budget and what those are going to mean that are specifically for rural hospitals. And so they're interested in that and what the state can do to make sure that they have all the available resources to apply for those grants and to get those grants. And so that's where my focus will be.
All right. Senator Weber, same fairness question.
Well, as it relates to free meals for all in the schools, my two kids live up in the suburban area of the Twin Cities. And they both say it is one of the most wasteful programs that they have seen. Number one, they can afford to pay for their meals. Number two, there are programs out there already to help families who couldn't afford the meals. And they said when you go to the food lines and you see the amount of waste that is occurring there, of food that is thrown away, they said it was a program that in their opinion was totally unnecessary for much of Minnesota. Now, as it relates to who pays their fair share, the reality of it is, the question is, what is a fair share? I mean, that's always been the $64,000 question. And quite frankly, if you look at what has happened in Minnesota's business climate, we have seen, particularly being border communities, we have seen so many jobs move across the state line because of the tax burden that our companies have to shoulder. I always use the example, we had two homegrown companies in Laverne, the Laverne Fire Apparatus, Laverne Truck Equipment. They went from a combined total of about 60, 80 employees to over 200. But you know where that increase happened? Over in Brandon, South Dakota. So it has been the tax policies of the state of Minnesota that have driven thousands and thousands of jobs out of this state. Jobs that if they were here would be contributing to the income of the state of Minnesota and would be helping to support our schools, support those who are less fortunate, and still, quite frankly, the state of Minnesota needs to do what the federal government did. We need to lower our tax rates so that we keep our jobs, that we attract more jobs, and have the additional revenue to do what we need to do. And so, as we go forward from here, I will continue to advocate for those type of policies. I will continue to advocate for responsible state spending in these different areas. And as it relates to what was passed at the federal level, number one, as Representative Schumacher mentioned, there are a number of grants that are going to be available to our hospitals. The reality of it is what is going to happen is still unknown. Everyone talks about all these cuts to Medicaid. Well, you know what? The only cuts that are happening at this point to Medicaid are in relationship to those people who don't qualify for it in the first place. And so, and there is a substantial amount of that out there. And so we will continue to go forward with that, and how it will all work out in the end, I don't think anyone really has an answer for that at this point. But we at that point we're going, like I said, we'll have to deal with it as it comes.
Representative Fogelman.
Thank you for the question and the statement. I also heard from schools that there were no kids that were getting refused meals before. There are lots of parents, as Senator Weber said, that can afford the meals. They don't need that assistance. Again, it's a tax burden on our even our lower income earners, and we don't want to put more tax burden on them. As far as the corporate tax, I believe that we're one of the highest taxed corporate tax in the nation. And the more we do that, the more people leave. I think that in the last session, the people leaving, it was like over $2 billion of tax revenue left our state because of our how our taxes work in Minnesota. They're not coming back, and the people coming in are not going to make up that over $2 billion of taxes. So we kind of have to look at everything. We want to encourage growth in our state. And again, Senator Weber said we're losing to South Dakota. We're also losing to Iowa. We're losing to Wisconsin and North Dakota. We want people to come here. And the more people we have here, better wages, people can afford their things, and we don't need the government to take care of us. That's not what the government's set up to do. They're supposed to be keeping us safe and working on our roads and bridges. In our last session, we did do some more funding to our state roads and gave extra money to county state aid and some of our townships, so that was all good. But as far as the big, beautiful bill, as they both mentioned, it's still unraveling, and we're still going to see. So all I can hope is that it continues to help not just Minnesota, but our whole country, because then it will be better for everybody.
All right, Mr. Parrish?
My name is Eric Parrish. I'm on the Worthington School Board here. And MSBA is reporting to us that we're going to lose $61.36 per student with the tax cuts in the big beautiful bill. And, you know, that's $250,000 for us. And then further, this compensatory rate fund is a big issue for us. And they were projecting us to lose about $2 million, and then you ended up passing a no harm policy for this go round. But in the future, we do need to deal with this compensatory formula so that it's more supportive of our district. I mean, in Worthington, we're looking at a 13% poverty rate of our students and our families in our district, and those funds are really important to us. So can you talk a little bit about your knowledge of the compensatory fund formula and where we're at with that?
So once again, for Cable 3, a little technical question, so I'll be brief, but some potential lost funding, $61 per student or $250,000 to District 518, along with some concerns for compensatory funding loss. Senator Weber, you're up first.
Well, I can't actually give you a very definitive discussion on how the compensatory formula works. I mean, the inner workings of it. Actually, the compensatory formula, as I understand, was set up to actually allow for the poverty rate that you're mentioning, and I haven't been on the E12 Education Committee for 9 years, and so I'm sort of away from that part of that discussion. But certainly. And I don't know, at the national level, exactly where that cut is coming from, that $61 that you mentioned. And there's a lot of projected cuts that may or may not happen at this point, because they're also part of the dismantling of the Federal Department of Education is to actually take the money that was being spent within that and send that back into the states in order to, be spent on our students. Now, to be honest with you, our current Department of Education, I'm not real thrilled with. I not know if that's going to be a good thing for our schools out here or not, because they typically tend to favor the metro schools more than they favor greater Minnesota schools anyway. But But certainly, those are issues that are going to be dealt with probably in the next year or two. And how that will be dealt with, I honestly can't give you an idea today.
Representative Fogelman?
I don't have a lot to add to what Senator Weber said. I am on the Education Committee this year. It's new to me. I'm still learning about how all that stuff works. But I'd be happy to meet with you at some time and go over your concerns and bring that back to the committee.
Representative Schumacher?
Yeah. All I've learned in my time with state government is that the formulas change pretty constantly, depending on whoever's in power and what new ideas had there. And you think you have something that can last for a decade or longer, and it doesn't. And so I would just ask you what if there's anything you'd like to see changed, if you'd like us to keep it as it is, or if there are enhancements that could be made to it that we can bring back with that.
Next question or thoughts? Please.
My name is Maggie Winnicky. I was wondering if in this session or if in the next session there are plans to discuss funding for the IMLS fund that President Trump has cut. That's the Museum and Library Science Funds. He has planned to cut them. I know South Dakota completely lost their interlibrary loan funding as of April. I work at a library in Laverne, and we've been told we have funding for our interlibrary loan system through September, and then we might have to start cutting that. And that's a program that libraries and communities depend on greatly, specifically homeschoolers, specifically kids doing reports for regular schooling. I know that our library uses ILL frequently. We get 2 deliveries every week, and we have full trucks every 2 times we get those deliveries. So I was wondering if there's anything that has been discussed about supporting public libraries if funding runs out in September, or if that's something that you guys have discussed already.
Okay, so Maggie from the Laverne Library asked about IMLS. Funding was cut federally, and if there's any back funding or any solutions at a state level. And I think Representative Fogelman first, please.
Thank you for that question. It's not something I'm super familiar with. I'd be happy to dig into it more and discuss with you further, but without really knowing how exactly all that works, all I can do is do some research for you and see what I can find out.
Representative Schumacher.
Yeah, and with this particular program with libraries, is that coming out of the education budget or out of the legacy budget?
Would be a good question. I could double check with that too as well.
Okay.
I've just been told that, we have funding for our ILL systems through September. So I'll check with the education or legacy.
Okay, because I know they run kind of parallel like that. I know in Minnesota too right now, we've been doing a lot to honor the memory of Representative Mary Murphy, who her big passion in the legislative, in her time there was on libraries. And so it would make sense to me that there would be an extra focus on and an extra incentive, because I can't remember exactly what we had done, but we, for that particular piece, but there was a bigger push on libraries this year than what we've seen in the past because of that, just more honoring her legacy with that. But there's also, within either or, if it's legacy or education, they both have discretionary funds to be able to backfill some of those programs as they see fit before the legislature comes back in February, and it could be addressed then. But as far as I know, any preemptive measures for that were not included in the last budget.
Thank you, Senator Weber.
Yeah, I really have nothing to add to that. I mean, those are the 2 areas where libraries are funded from. And I know there was a discussion within the education budget that was passed about the library part of it. But again, I don't expect for us to be into session until February 17th of next year. So if there's any shortfall that occurs before then, they're going to have to deal with the funds. The state's going to have to deal with it on the funds they have on hand in order to make up any shortfall at that point.
Other questions? Yes, please, Darcy.
My name is Darcy Gedke. I'm the executive director of SMOC. We're a community action agency serving the 4 counties down here in the corner of the state. I don't have necessarily a policy or platform question for you. You've talked about a lot of tough decisions that you have to make in your careers as decision makers. And I guess I just want to know, like, at the end of the day, where, in your heart and in your head, where do those decisions come from? What drives you to make the decision, those tough decisions that you have to make?
All right, so a little bit of a philosophical approach from Darcy at SMOC and Representative Schomacher. I think you're up first. The question being, what really drives your decision making on some of these tough challenges? Yeah,
and in some ways, the more time that's spent there, it gets easier because you know kind of decisions you've made in the past and what impacts those have had. In other ways, it's harder because you get to meet more people, and so every bill, every budget implication has faces behind there. With that, you also have the issue of the Capitol Dome problem, where everyone feels like the biggest issue is whatever they're working on at the time, and so you get kind of this buildup because that's what everyone's talking about, but you're only talking to 12 people, and so it seems like the biggest thing out there. That was actually one of the best things during COVID when we were remote, is that we could have a conversation in committee, and then that would seem like the biggest thing that was going on, but then I'd shut the Zoom call off, go across the street to the coffee shop, and no one's talking about it there. Go figure that the work that's being done in the legislature, the folks back home kind of think that that's the work that should be done, but they're not going to involve themselves as much with it every day. And so that was perspective setting within some of that. And so as far as decision making goes and what goes into that, I always look back at the last campaign cycle. First and foremost, was it talked about at all? Did it come up in a forum? Did it come up on a questionnaire? Did I have it as part of my campaign platform? If those were things that I talked about, then we're kind of locked in as far as that goes and how I'm going to vote, because that's what I told the voters. If you elect me, that's how I'm going to vote. 99.85% of the other things that we actually deal with in the legislature that never come up in the campaign cycle, you start to consider just overall how the district, based on previous voting and what you hear downtown, kind of works. What you're hearing through emails, phone calls, letters, those types of things start to play into it overall. And then the more you know about the actors at the Capitol and what they're trying to accomplish, and maybe they've tried this in the past, or maybe there's a different way to do it, or maybe we've tried it before and it didn't work, but there's a different approach to it. The more you get into it, the more options you have in making the decision. The greater the context, in some ways it's harder, in some ways it's easier to make those decisions. But it really, I just use the last election as a guiding point for where I'm at. I try to stay consistent as much as I can. If I'm not going to be consistent, I want to be able to justify it in some way, shape, or form. And so I have to at least know in that realm what I'm going to be doing. And then at the end of the day, especially this year, I had to remind myself again and again and again that politics is the art of the possible. And we were tied in one chamber in one part of the bill writing process, and that there was also the Senate, there was also the other half that was equally in power, and the governor to deal with, and what was possible and what I wanted to see were not always the same. So I try to get as close as to what I want to see and still have something that was possible in there, and that's how I operated, especially this year.
Senator Weber, how do you take those challenges on?
Well, you know, when you run a campaign, they always tell you should center on 2 or 3 main issues, and then you get up there and you recognize that even within those 2 or 3 issues, there's a whole subset of issues that come into play, and certainly, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of it depends on a budget. You know, I mentioned that I've been there for 13 years. When I came into the state Senate, our biennial budget was roughly, $36 billion, if I remember right, back in those days. Is that right, Joe? Mm-hmm. $36 billion. And it went to basically in in 2022 or 2023, the budget that was passed spent over $70 billion. So the state is spending a lot more money. And the reality as it is, you come to find out that sometimes it isn't just the money that solves the problem. And so it's necessary, but you have to take a look at how government is functioning. And, you know, quite frankly, the state government could function better. And as we go forward from here, I mentioned earlier the situation where everybody else was expected to take a cut, but state government itself didn't take any cuts. And if we are truly a government of, for, and by the people, then we should have to live with the same things that they have to live with. And so as I make my decisions, you know, you try to preserve those programs that you know are doing what they're supposed to do, are successful. At the end of the day, if the money isn't there, then there are cuts that have to be made, and those are challenging to make. But you know, even then, you go out and you're back in your district, you find out which of those programs are really working and working well, and you do your best to preserve that. And you know, and from one year to the next, like I said, every year is a different year. And I look at it, you know, you go back a couple of years, we had an $18 billion surplus. Think of what we did not accomplish with an $18 billion surplus. We didn't get our roads adequately fixed. We didn't address the mental health issue the way it should be addressed in the state of Minnesota. We didn't fix our funding situation for our schools. We spent a whole bunch of money on a whole lot of things that, if you go back, actually didn't probably accomplish a whole lot of things. And what happens is when you spend all those extra dollars, people then come to expect those same dollars have to be spent as we go forward. And then you run into a year where you have a shortfall and you've created a whole bunch of additional problems. So, you know, my goal is to grow the economy of this state. Because the more jobs we have, the more people we have paying into the system, the more reliable the system becomes. So.
It was an interesting stat, the doubling basically during your tenure as up at the Capitol of spending. And so that was 13 sessions, you said? So 13 years.
Yep.
So compounding about a 5% rate. So big, but a 5% rate, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Senator Fogelman.
Thank you for that question. I think the first thing I do when I am making decisions up there is I pray about it. My faith is very important to me, and it's what drives me to even be doing this right now. Another thing, as the newbie up here, I can say that you can't make everybody happy no matter what you do. So you have to just look at what's best for the district and best for the state. We don't just hear from people in District 21 across the state. I mean, we hear from people all over the state all the time on what's important. So you kind of have to take a lot of things into consideration. It's not just necessarily yes or no the first time you look at something. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider. There's lots of variables, and you have to look not just at the here and now, what it's going to affect, but what it's going to affect down the road. It's not always easy, and it's not always fun, but that's why it's great to always get feedback from our constituents. That's what helps us make the decisions that we make up there. And without your input, then we kind of get left out in the wind sometimes, and then we make the decisions, and then we have to stand by them. And like I said, my faith drives me on that. I will always be the most important thing in my life, no matter what it is, this job or anything else. And I always appreciate it when people discuss things with me, whether it's email, phone, face to face. There's so much to take into consideration when you're making decisions, but I try to not just do it flippantly.
Thank you, and that gets us to the end of our hour. Again, thank you for showing up, and thank you all of you for showing up as well. It's important to continue to move these issues and stay engaged. And more importantly, I think thanks for taking the follow-up phone calls and over time as well. So with that, have a great Monday and a great week.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.